Good evening, everyone. This is Brian, and welcome to episode 30 of my reusable space program career mode. Now, what you are looking at right now is a mission with the Orbital Transfer Vehicle 2.0. Redid this one. No need to take a lot of weight into space. You're in a vacuum, may as well go with the lightest thing possible, which is why you see a big ball there with a framework around it. And the previous version I thought was a little lacking in engine power, so I added a third engine to it. Now, this mission, very soon I'm going to start landing landers on different biomes of the moon and collecting tons and tons of science, but I want to work the experience aspect of this game as much as possible. And that means that some Kerbals need to do a flyby of the moon, and then an orbit of the moon, and then a landing on the moon before they go to different biomes to plant flags. And in between all those missions, they need to actually come back to the Kerbal Space Center to cash in on their experience and move on. So, to aid in this, doing a flyby of the moon, there's a lot of science at the moon I have not gathered yet. So, looking at one of my favorite mods there on the left called Science X or X Science, and what that does is just kind of help you keep track of what you've completed and how much is left to go and what is left on your, or what is currently being held on your spacecraft and not cashed in. So the way I've been doing this is I'm watching that biome readout there on the bottom of that X Science window. When it happens, I'll trigger the science experiments and send out my scientists to take the data, store the data, log the data, etc. If it has something where I can get points for it by just sending it back, I'll send it back and then quickly take another sample. And the idea here is that I'm sending back as much as I can, and then there should be two samples left, one that can stay in the hab pod and one that can stay in the command pod up top, and I will bring those all the way back to Kerbin to get all the points I can. Now, mostly what I was collecting there was space high over Mun Science experiments, but when I got back to Kerbin and started orbiting, there were some here left to do too, so I'm going ahead and grabbing as much as I can on the way back to the station. But that's not all I have to do with these Kerbals. I also have to send them all the way back to Kerbin with the science, or as much as I can. I have two of each experiment and only one capsule, so I'm going to send them down with half of the science I collected. I can't remember exactly, there's probably a good 20 experiments in here, maybe 1,000 points worth, so it's very critical that I get this down safely. And power landings are always entertaining, so let's go watch that. Now I want to show you something. I started doing things a little bit different here on the Deorbit Burn. I set up the node just like I always do, which you've seen 100 times, but I realized that that red X, the landing prediction, only displays what I would do if I burned the node. So what I started doing was I would set the node up, aim the capsule at the marker on the nav ball, start burning, and then delete the node, and then just watch that red landing prediction go right to where I want it. Why is that better? Well, I think it's better because that way you don't stop burning and then suddenly realized that the trajectory landing prediction has changed and now you got to fix it. Let's see, let's turn off all this stuff so you can watch this in all of its glory. That is, as soon as I double check the electrical situation. Alright, enough of that. Now, I've got the Nav Hut installed, as you saw in the last episode, so I'm starting to use this a little bit more and more, and I'm definitely liking it. It does take some getting used to, because you're looking at the other side of the nav ball, typically from what you see at the bottom of your screen. But I'm starting to play around with getting that prograde vector sitting right on the piece of land I'd like to land on. More of that later. And in addition to regaining a small amount of money from the parts, got 450, 460 science, and the crew gained an experience as well. That's great. Next stop for these guys is to orbit Mun. And we'll get to the main event shortly. Just wanted to let you know that this weird looking thing made up of different parts that contain different supplies for the station was launched by an LV-375, and since I'm keeping score, I figured that you should know that the score is now LV-375-6 Gravity 1, and yes, this thing made it back safely too. That's all you need to know about that launch. All right, moving along. All right, finally, let's get this lander up there. So, this is really weird. This thing is built with LL parts, and I'll release a small, anatomy of this lander. It's pretty interesting. I've never seen anything else like it done by anybody else. Beautiful launch there, rising into the sun. So I will piece this apart in detail in a small episode, small special released in between this one and the next one, I promise. So what's different about this is that I'm launching it naked. The fairing just looked absolutely ridiculous around it. And so even though this thing is small enough to be launched by an LV-250, my strategy here is to launch it with an LV-375. And I'm going to kind of manage my speed a little bit here and not boost this thing, up to supersonic speeds here very quickly. It's going to kind of go slow, and then when I get a little bit higher than normal, I'll probably tip it over into the more normal trajectory, and all that requires more fuel, so going with the bigger launch vehicle. And because that thing up top is kind of a weird shape and it's very lightweight, got to be very careful here with the balancing of the launch vehicle. And by now we're up to a reasonable speed, so I'm going to throttle back in this middle part of the atmosphere here, and once I get up above 30 kilometers, I can probably gun the engines again. Okay, back up to full throttle or nearly full throttle, and going to more aggressively pitch down. This high up, the air resistance doesn't mean so much to the rocket, and you can be a little less careful with your steering. I'm trying to flatten out the trajectory here a lot so that my circularization burn is not so fuel costly here. And I'll get in here close so you can get another look at this. Basically, it's a classic lander shape as far as being very very short and very wide. This is built mostly with the LLL parts and tracks from the Kerbal Foundries mod there. So it does resemble a tank, and it's basically the shortest or the smallest vehicle I could possibly design. It still has a couple of thousand delta V on it. It can carry 3 crew members, pilot, engineer, scientist, and of course it has science experiments all around the front of it. And it has those weird looking engines pointed down, and there's a very good reason for those. It makes this much easier to fly in a vacuum on Mun. You don't really need an aerodynamic shape, you don't need wings. What you do need is something that's easy to fly. So by putting the thrust vector way up high, kind of like an Osprey, a V-22 Osprey, the center of mass is down low, and what will happen is it will naturally want to return to a horizontal, horizontal attitude, so that I don't, go out of control with it in VTOL mode. Now, I think it's a little too much to ask of this lander to do this, orbital change, do the circularization, do the deorbit landing, and all that stuff. So I'm going to use some of the fuel left in the booster. I have some extra there to give this thing another few hundred delta V before it continues on its own. Now I've already set up both nodes, so I need to actually detach this here and then very quickly get it away from the booster and get it moving. And now you can see the path the booster is going to take there. On that blue line, it's going to loop up around, and when it returns back to periapsis, that's about where it's going to be doing its deorbit burn and landing. And the planned burn for the lander is to continue on up there to make its intercept with Mun. And after burning out the translunar burn, I'm going to go around here and orientate this craft so that the solar panels are getting lots and lots of sunlight. Those LV909s do not generate electricity, and I want to make sure that I don't have a dead craft when it comes time to do my orbital insertion burn at Mun. Now, next up here is to make sure that I get on a good polar trajectory with very little fuel usage. So I set up a node about roughly halfway up the orbit and focus on Mun, and now you can see here, I'll kind of do this slowly in detail so you can see it. So now I'm going to move now I can see how I'm going to enter Mun's influence here, and I'm going to move this around here now so that I have a good polar inclination. And this just takes some doing. Sometimes it's not totally predictable on which node there, which direction you want to burn, but just play around with it a little bit, you'll get it. And sometimes you'll find out that there are two different ways to do it, one that is fairly expensive in fuel and one that is relatively cheap. So play around with it before you burn it. It shouldn't take, I don't know, I think in here I finally get it down usually like 30 meters per second or something that's needed to do this correctly. Okay, that node looks pretty good. Time to go ahead and burn that course correction. And you always should finish this off in map mode because these can be delicate. Finish it at a nice slow throttle, and you might even use a little bit of RCS here at the very end because those are very small thrust. And once again, turning it back towards the sun. And when that is complete, go ahead and set up my circularization burn. And what I did there is I just set it exactly to the periapsis and I just drag it retrograde until I've got a nice circle. Alright, now it's time to just enjoy a scenic moment here with the game. As this carefully constructed craft hurtles towards the moon towards Mun at 2.5 or 2 kilometers a second or whatever it is, accelerating into the gravitational well. Okay, time to circularize, and I think I'm going to keep pushing this series in the direction of having all this GUI interface up when it matters and not when it doesn't, so that the game just looks prettier. Okay, so after circularizing, gotta do some homework here. Gotta set up get to work. Got to set up a node here, which serves as a marker and timer on when to start my deceleration burn. And the other very important task I need to do is rebalance my fuel tanks. I have about half a load of fuel right now, and that half is probably taken out of almost entirely out of one of those two tanks along each side. So what you do here is you pull up TAC Fuel Balancer and you tell it to balance all, and it will balance all your fuel. If your tanks were set at 100% in the VAB and everything was balanced vis-a-vis your horizontal thrusters, vertical thrusters, then if you balance all right now, it should be balanced again with half fuel tanks. And by doing this ahead of time, I will avoid any crazy chaos after I finish my deceleration burn. Okay, now honestly with this landing, I was so much more relaxed than with landing other craft. I overshot this a little bit. I didn't really care. Honestly, I can set this down anywhere in this area, and I just have to spend a little bit of time driving to the landing site. And also, I've played around with this vehicle enough in the sandbox mode that I'm pretty confident I could set this down even on a slope. Doesn't really matter. Those treads give so much traction, and because you're landing on something that moves instead of landing legs, you don't need to set it down perfectly straight up and down. So my fuel is a little bit low here, and what I need to do is kind of push this over. At some point I make a decision that, yeah, I guess I can kind of head directly for that knoll over there and not just land anywhere. So I'm just managing my downward velocity here. Now we're getting in physics range. And after kind of gauging how much I slowed down with each of those braking burns, kind of looking down there, I realized that, you know what, I think I do have enough fuel to make it over to that hilltop, and wouldn't it be cool to land right next to it? So I kind of go for the challenge. Now we're in vertical mode, remember, so the way to do this, I'm going to show this all in one-time speed so you can see this. To go forward, you go nose down, because you're flying like a helicopter here. So there goes my prograde for direct vector moving up towards the hill. But it looks like it's going to kind of move towards the side of the hill, so what I need to do here is actually need to roll a little bit, which will move my direction of travel over to the left where it needs to go. So here we go, starting to roll a little bit. And I'm seeing that, yes, it's doing exactly what I thought it would. That's always good. So I can do this a little bit more and just keep pushing it over. The reason why it drops is because that's showing where I would hit the ground in my current direction of travel. It does not calculate in gravity, and of course as I move forward towards that, gravity starts to accelerate me more and more down, so the prograde vector goes more and more down. This mod is called Nav Hut, by the way. At least I think it is. That's good. Okay, now I don't want to increase my horizontal speed too much, so I'm starting to go nose up a little bit. If I get my nose above the horizon, then those thrusts will serve to slow me down. And I'm not really attempting to find a nice happy thrust level that keeps me coming in perfectly level. I'm going basically with the Y and the X keys. And the reason is because my frame rate right here is abysmally low. You'll find out more about that in the next episode. There's actually a bug happening that I did not realize was happening just yet. So with Y and X, it's fairly easy. If I try and just manage the throttle with shift and control, I tend to overcorrect. He says as he overcorrects right there. So now I'm coming in here, trying to brake as much as I can, but then also at the last second I need to turn my nose down towards that prograde vector so that I land, or horizontal but in the direction of that prograde vector, so that I land more or less, and I don't really pull it off too well here. I'm too close. So a little bit of a scary moment, but it rights itself. Yeah, the biggest danger with this is landing it with sideways horizontal motion, because those tracks have, like I said, a lot of traction. So if I do that, I'm probably just going to roll it over on its side and I'll smash an engine or something. Okay, now that it's on the ground, all I have to do is drive it on over to the base. Now, if you've been paying attention to the series, you'll realize that, hey, this base looks different. What the heck happened? Well, what happened was the MKS mod updated, and a lot of these parts changed. They changed colors, which was no problem. That didn't present any problems. But the habitation modules attached to the side of the Kerbitat and the agricultural modules attached to the side of the aeroponics module completely changed parts. And so I loaded it, and those parts were no longer available, and it did not like it at all. So I had to very quickly, I do want to go with the latest mods, so I chose to solve it by just removing those modules and their attachments back to the KSC, recovering them, resetting them in the spaceplane hangar with the newer parts, and then editing them back into place up here. So that's why it all of a sudden looks different. There's really no game change except for that. And Bill's just going to quickly go over here and hook up that new Lander/rover to the station so that it can be refueled. And then different crew will come down here to use that to fly to different biomes on Mun and grab all the science. Hey, what about that booster? Well, it turns out I almost forgot about it, so normally I would have landed this much sooner, and yeah, it took a few days to get back to this, and I was like, hey, that thing is still in orbit. I need to bring it back down. So, what better way to end a reusable Kerbal Space Program video than by landing a booster? And this more or less came down right on target. And I'm going to try something new here. Remember, I've lost landing gear on this thing several times. So I was thinking, I have RCS thrusters on top and bottom of this vehicle, and if those trigger to try and keep it upright, the bottom thrusters are probably wiggling the base. So what I'm going to do here is go in quickly and disable these bottom thrusters. It's hard to tell if it really helped. But I don't know. We'll see if this becomes a thing or not. I'm under a little bit of stress here because I'm coming down with some speed, so I gotta do this quickly. Okay, got those done on time. Now all I need to do is do a little bit of slowing down here at the main engines. And touch down. And it appears to have worked. All right, thank you for watching. I will see you next week, and until then, fly with confidence.